Ranging from strange spirits and supernatural entities to mutant monsters and crazed serial killers, Hollywood is filled with nightmarish monsters that leave the audience awestruck. These monsters have gained popularity owing to their terrorizing actions, and some of them have even become pop culture icons over the years. From kaiju such as Godzilla and King Kong to psycho killers such as Freddy Krueger, today we shall explore the top 15 legendary movie monsters and tell you all about them. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Godzilla series. It goes without saying that Godzilla is one of the most widely known monsters in cinema history, and this kaiju has inspired many movies, comic series, toy lines, and so on. First introduced in the 1954 Toho Productions film, Godzilla was a giant prehistoric creature who had mutated into a monstrous being after being exposed to nuclear weapons. As the franchise kicked off, Godzilla was portrayed as an antagonist who wreaks havoc, and it was said that death and destruction followed him everywhere. Over the years, Godzilla's character has evolved into an anti-hero, and his character development spans the Showa era, the Heisei era, and the current Reiwa era. Initially, Godzilla was introduced as the physical incarnation of society's greatest sins, and his monstrous tendencies were said to be a punishment to humanity for their nuclear crimes. This kaiju would stomp everyone in its path and destroy entire civilizations with the flick of his tail. And eventually, he evolved into a misunderstood anti-hero who even protected humanity from other mutated monsters at some point. Despite all his character development, Godzilla is immortalized in the hearts of audiences as a brutal monster who has stomped out numerous towns, but at the same time, he is viewed as a beloved creature and has a cult-like fan following. The Thing. Introduced as the titular antagonist of the 1982 sci-fi film, The Thing is a hostile organism with the ability to assimilate various organisms into its hive-minded system. It can be best described as an aggressive, shape-shifting being who operates under a hive mind and aims to assimilate as many species as it can into its life form. Over the years, The Thing had assimilated thousands of species in an attempt to ensure its survival, and it even fed on the knowledge and resources of its victims to grow more invulnerable. While it terrorized extraterrestrial life forms for eternity, the movie focused on the Thing's adventures on Earth as it attempted to attack humanity. As far as movie monsters go, The Thing is one of the most mysterious entities out there, and its true form and characteristics are largely unknown. It is shapeshifted into so many new forms and reconstituted its genetic structure after every new assimilation, which makes it nearly impossible to decipher its original nature. Since The Thing has now changed into a being with tentacles, teeth, claws, and limbs, among other things, it is said that this creature is vulnerable to molecular acid as it can disintegrate its assumed form and incapacitate its functioning. In any case, it is advisable to steer clear of these multi-organisms unless you want to risk being assimilated into their hive-minded organization.
Please, God.
This is God.
Freddy Krueger, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Famously known as one of the deadliest killers in horror history, Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street continues to inspire thousands of Halloween costumes every year. He is nothing short of an icon, and this character was initially a serial killer who turned into a malevolent spirit in death. He got his powers from the dream demons, and his MO was torturing his victims in their dreams and warping their realities before finally killing them. Mostly, Freddy derived some twisted pleasure from terrorizing children, and his main aim was to murder all the young kids in Springwood to exact revenge on their parents. As it turned out, their parents were responsible for torturing him and burning him alive, and then he returned as a demonic spirit who donned an infamous mask. Freddy was also notoriously known for collecting his victims' spirits to gain strength from them, and he was always on the lookout for fresh, creative ways of inflicting pain upon those who were unfortunate enough to catch his eye. Alien Xenomorph. Alien, 1979. Known as an extraterrestrial endoparasitoid, the Xenomorph was a deadly organism known for latching itself to host bodies to reproduce. While Xenomorphs were monstrous beings who originated from Xenomorph Prime, they could survive in any condition, and they mostly sought out human hosts to reproduce. These creatures were also known as aliens, and they initially came to life in the form of an egg laid by the Xenomorph queen. This egg soon hatched into a facehugger who quite literally latches onto a host's face and wraps its tail around their neck to suffocate them. Soon enough, the facehugger implants the Xenomorph embryo down the host's neck, and this embryo sucks all the nutrients from within the host's body. While this process usually results in the host losing consciousness and waking up with a carnal hunger to feed the embryo within its body, the embryo then takes the form of a chestburster and quite literally bursts out into the open through the host's chest. This process typically kills the host, and the chestburster hibernates in the real world until it takes the form of an adult. Mostly, adult xenomorphs sought out their prey by luring them into shadows and then sneaking up on them. These monsters were also quite deadly in the sense that they could not be easily killed, as any attack on them would result in their bodies spurting out acidic blood that could corrode and kill anything that came into contact with it. The film mostly focused on the xenomorphs as they attacked a spacecraft and killed its crew, and these creatures were such a huge hit they soon inspired a bunch of media that expanded the Alien universe. King Kong. King Kong series. Directed by Marion C. Cooper, the 1933 King Kong movie was our first introduction to this gigantic gorilla who has now been immortalized in our history books. Kong was the titular protagonist of an action-adventure film that focused on his journey from a remote island to modern civilization, where he had been dragged against his will. His origins are shrouded in mystery, but it is known that the USS Venture crew found him on Skull Island and captured him so that they could bring him to New York and parade him. While the crew hoped that King Kong would put on a spectacular show that would attract crowds, he escaped and ran off to the Empire State Building, where he sadly fell to his death. While this was the movie's plot, Kong has been reimagined by several production houses and comic creators as a ravaging monster who destroys everything in his path. He was also known for his brute strength, and Kong later had a son named Kiko who carried forward his legacy. Kong was also among the few monstrous entities known for his intelligence and ability to show emotions. In his first iteration, Kong was portrayed as a single-minded character who mainly focused on saving one of the USS Venture's crew members named Ann Darrow, but over the course of history, Kong's behavior has taken a turn for the worse as he displays violent tendencies and tries to destroy anything and anyone who gets in his way. Count Orlok. Nosferatu, 1922. Also known as Nosferatu, Count Orlok was the titular antagonist of the 1922 silent horror movie Nosferatu, a symphony of horror. As the name suggests, Orlok was a supernatural entity whose mere name was enough to send a shudder down one's spine. He stayed deep within the lands of Romania and was essentially a reclusive vampire who stayed within his castle and spread plagues among the nearby villages for centuries. Inspired by Bram Stoker's Dracula, this character is one of the most faithful representations of vampires on the big screen, and Orlok is considered one of the most horrifying monsters in this genre. He unleashed chaos among the village folk in Romania and established himself as the undisputed ruler of the Carpathian Mountains. He was also one of the oldest iterations of vampires in media, which meant that he was not portrayed as a seductive, ageless being, but rather as a tall, bald vampire with pointy ears and sharp fangs. Orlok may not seem like such a threat, but one interaction with this ruthless being was enough to terrorize anyone, and he had a knack for stirring up chaos and spreading plagues all over the land of Europe. The Pale Man, Pan's Labyrinth, 2006. Introduced in the 2006 dark fantasy movie titled Pan's Labyrinth, the Pale Man was quite literally a pale humanoid monster who drew attention due to his strange physiology and hideous, elastic skin. For starters, his eyes had empty sockets, and his eyeballs were fitted into his palms instead. If this was not enough to terrorize us, the Pale Man was also a paranormal man-eater who lured children into his lair and fed on them. There were several paintings of him in action as he devoured the bodies of little kids and then piled up their clothes and shoes in a corner of his lair. It was also said that he himself painted these walls to boast about his actions, and the clothes were a trophy for him to keep track of each killing. This story was set in the post-Civil War era in Spain, where food scarcity was a major cause of death, and Pale Man used this to his advantage to lure his victims by laying out a massive banquet of food in his lair. Yautja, Predator, 1987. Popularly known as predators or hunters, Yautja were extraterrestrial beings who were best known for hunting down other species for sport. They can be described as bipedal humanoids, except that they were much taller than humans and had reptilian skin and strange facial features. They could be best identified by their long, hair-like, thick appendages that sprouted from their heads and the arthropod-like mandibles that took up most of their face. While they were humanoids who resided in a world with a similar atmosphere as Earth, the Yautja were far more advanced and had developed a whole lot of fascinating technology that enabled them in their missions to stalk and kill their prey species. While this does not sound that bad, the Yautjas actually had a tradition of mutilating their prey and then claiming a trophy of some sort from their killings. While they often hunted down humans or other humanoids, the Yautja were primarily obsessed with the deadly Xenomorphs, whom we explored a little while ago in this video. Since the Xenomorphs were portrayed as deadly entities, the Yautja were fixated on them as the ideal prey. They would even hold Xenomorph queens captive and cruelly breed new generations of Xenomorphs so that they could set them free and then hunt them down as an initiation procedure for young Yautjas. The Wolfman. The Wolfman, 1941. Known as the titular antagonist of the 1941 film The Wolfman, this creature needs no introduction. It goes without saying that his story follows the life of a so-called Wolfman, whose story begins with a young man named Larry Talbot. As Talbot returns to his family home in Walesto, he falls for a local girl who works at an antique shop and buys a walking stick with a silver wolf's head from her. While the girl warns Larry about the dangers of being associated with this stick, he goes ahead and makes the purchase before asking her out. As the movie progresses, the stick does have an impact on Larry as he turns into a humanoid wolf hybrid and wreaks havoc all over town. He ends up committing a series of murders at night and somehow always wakes up with no memory of his actions until one day he falls into a trap and finally comes to terms with his actions with some help from a Romani fortune teller's mother, Maleva. While Larry does not seem to be a bad person, his terrifying beast persona makes him worthy of ending up on this list, as what is scarier than seeing a good man turn feral without feeling any remorse over his killings? Gill-man, the creature from the Black Lagoon. So far we have explored vampires, alien creatures, and a wolfman. So what's next? You couldn't have guessed this right, but we now have a monster known as the Gill-man, also better known as the creature from the Black Lagoon. While he may not be as famous as Count Dracula or the Wolfman, Gill-man has gained icon status as the last surviving member of an amphibious humanoid species from the pits of the Amazonian rainforests. He had green skin that helped him camouflage and blend in with the trees in the forest, and, as the name suggests, he was famously known for having scales and gills all over his body. Gill-man was quite animalistic in nature, and he was often shown preying on humans and killing them by crushing their skulls. While he mostly preferred this method, this monster sometimes resorted to more violent ways of killing, and he was known for his vicious nature. He was determined to protect his land from any destruction or intrusions, and most of his aggression stemmed from feelings of loneliness and sadness over being the last surviving member of his species. Pennywise the Dancing Clown. It, 2017. As far as clowns go, this one needs no introduction. Yes, you got it right. We are talking about none other than the legendary Pennywise, also popularly known as the Dancing Clown. Introduced as one of the most terrifying entities in the Stephen King mythos, Pennywise was a billion-year-old cosmic entity who had spawned into existence in the voids of the Macroverse. While it spent its initial years in the 2-darkness, Pennywise decided to travel to Earth at some point in its life to feed on humanity. It made its way to the New England town of Derry, where it routinely bounced back into action every 27 years to feed on the fears of the town's children. He also used a dark form of energy known as the deadlights, which appeared as bright orange lights that would draw the children's attention and lure them to Pennywise. Soon enough, Pennywise would use clown tricks to lure its victims and even shapeshift to take the form of his victims' worst fears. While these children writhed in fear and pain, Pennywise would strike while the iron was hot and instantly kill and feed on them. Among other things, Pennywise had earned a reputation for mutilation, psychological torture, and child abuse, and it was advised for all kids to steer clear of the streets whenever it was time for Pennywise to crawl out of his hiding every few decades or so. Bruce the Shark, Jaws, 1975. Also known as Jaws, this character is probably responsible for instilling a newfound phobia of sharks in the minds of an entire generation. Yes, we shall now look at none other than Bruce, the shark from the 1975 film Jaws. Bruce was a gigantic white shark that weighed about 6,000 pounds and stood about 25 feet tall. He has been ranked as one of the most terrifying villains in cinema history, and he lurked in the waters of Amity Island and fed on any swimmer who dared to venture within the sea. After killing a young child and catching the eye of the local police, Bruce went on to kill a bunch of other swimmers until the police had to intervene and put a stop to his killing spree. However, his coat was tough enough for him to bear bullet shots without feeling any pain, and his strength was quite limitless. It took quite a bit of force to do any substantial damage to his physique, and he was finally killed off when the police chief, Brody, shoved an air tank up his mouth and then blew him to bits. Number 13. Candyman. Candyman 1992. Candyman, or Daniel Robitaille, has gained a reputation as one of the most twisted horror icons of all time, and he was inspired by a character in Clive Barker's short story, The Forbidden. As the story goes, Candyman is supposedly portrayed as a painter who lived in Chicago in the early 1800s. He was once commissioned to paint a wealthy landowner's daughter, but tragedy struck when Candyman fell for her. While the two young lovers were determined to make it work, the girl's father sent a lynch mob to kill Candyman by sawing off his right hand with a blade and then smearing his body with honey so that bees could devour him before he was finally burned to death. While he had a tragic origin story, his brutal murders and deadly nature made it quite difficult for audiences to view him with sympathy. Portrayed by Tony Todd in the 1992 Candyman film, Candyman appeared in the form of a tall man who towered over other characters and wore a brown fur trench coat to hide his bodily mutilations. These mutilations included a hollowed-out stomach that had now taken the form of a honeybee hive with live bees buzzing underneath his coat, among other things. He also had a skinless rib cage and a metal hook on his right hand. Candyman often used this hook to mutilate his victims. His death shaped him into a heartless, stone-cold killer with a narcissistic personality and a god complex, and any encounter with him was fated to end in death. The Behemoth. The Mist. Also known as the impossibly tall creature, the Behemoth was an enormous six-legged monster who stood at a height of about 240 feet. It could be identified by its spindly, double-jointed legs and the large tentacles that sprouted from its head. While these features are enough to identify the Behemoth if we ever stumble into its path, its most terrifying feature was the large number of scorpion flies that clung to its leg and buzzed around it at all times. While this creature is said to be mostly neutral and harmless, its gigantic posture was enough to terrify anyone in its path. It was also said that the Behemoth does not harm anyone because it is just too large to even spot a human in its path, and it once even passed right over a character who was driving through the mist without even taking note of their presence. Frankenstein's monster, Frankenstein. And to end this list, we have none other than the legendary Frankenstein's monster, first introduced to us in Mary Shelley's iconic novel by the same name. Frankenstein's monster first appeared on the big screen in the 1931 Universal Pictures adaptation of the book, where he was initially introduced as a harmless creation. However, he he soon turned hostile and cruel after being subjected to a whole lot of mistreatment at the hands of human society. While he only desired to be loved and accepted by others, his need for belonging was not satiated by humans who brutally shamed and shunned him. This mostly happened due to his appearance, as Henry Frankenstein had quite literally sewn his body together using scraps from dead bodies. After creating a body that somewhat resembled a human, Henry used electricity to bring this monster to life, while his assistant got his hands on a criminal brain that could be fitted into the monster's head. While Frankenstein's monster initially appeared as a docile creature, he soon turned to violent crimes such as mutilation, stalking, and attempted murder, and even ended up killing a child. Marvelous verdict. To wrap things up, all these monsters may hail from different backgrounds and vary in terms of their MOs, but they all manage to instill fears in the hearts of their victims as well as the audience. Ranging from alien species such as the Yautja and Xenomorphs to vampires and kaiju, we attempted to incorporate some of the deadliest beasts in the history of Hollywood. Let us know your favorites in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.